The wind bit at Brian's face as he sprinted down a cobbled street, shoes thudding against the worn stone with a rhythm that almost made him forget he wasn't on Earth anymore. Almost. "Okay," he muttered between breaths, weaving around a cart of turnips. "So, cardio on Earth? Fine. Cardio here? Literal death trial." The city of Greyhearth was just waking up, the early sun slanting gold across the slate rooftops and casting long shadows into alleys. Smoke curled from chimneys, bakeries were rolling out dough, and a sleepy cat gave him a judgmental stare as he ran by. He didn't care. He was on a mission. He knew his weaknesses and he was fixing them, bit by bit, day by day. More importantly, he was no longer alone. He was part of the group now, and that thought filled him with a quiet kind of joy he hadn't felt in a long time. Still, he hadn't slept much the night before. His mind refused to be quiet, thoughts of past battles and looming challenges circling endlessly like vultures. The hours dragged by, heavy and unrelenting, until all he could do was lie awake, staring at the ceiling, trapped between exhaustion and restless unease. By the next morning, he'd reached 3 clear conclusions. First off, his training was working. He could feel it. In the last fight, his stamina had held out longer, enough that he'd guess he'd gained at least 2 or 3% more endurance. That might not sound like much, but in battle every heartbeat counted. He'd once heard someone say, "The longer you can stay in the fight, the more chances you have to turn it around." After taking down that ogre king, he definitely believed that now. Tomorrow he planned to add agility drills to his routine. He wanted every movement to be fluid, every strike to flow into the next. He wanted to know exactly where his next step would land before his foot even touched the ground, and to keep that precision while fighting multiple enemies at once. All of it had to become second nature, reflex burned into muscle and bone. Secondly, what was that strange power that always surged up when he was in real danger? In the isekai stories he remembered, the hero usually got some kind of gift, magic, divine blessing, or an outright cheat ability. But this wasn't magic. As much as he wished it was, he knew better. It felt different, closer to a physical transformation, like the sudden power-ups he'd seen in anime back on Earth. A raw, explosive strength that sharpened his body and heightened his senses. No golden hair, no glowing aura, just pure physical might, his muscles surging with energy that wasn't there before. And yet, he couldn't control it. Not yet. It came only when his back was against the wall, when the odds were stacked and his body screamed at him to survive. The real question gnawed at him. Could he learn to call on it at will? Or would he always have to dance with death just to wake it up? Thirdly, there was Freya. Brian had to admit it. He really, really liked her. She was easily the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, human or otherwise. Her elven grace was dazzling, the kind of beauty that didn't fade no matter how many battles she fought or how cold her stare could get. Every now and then, though, he caught glimpses of something different, moments where the icy mask slipped and she seemed almost warm. He told himself he could just let it ride, play it cool, let things happen naturally. But then, she kissed him. Maybe she thought he was unconscious, maybe it was just a fleeting impulse. But the fact remained, Freya, proud and guarded Freya, had felt comfortable enough to press her warm lips against his. And that wasn't something he could brush off. What was he supposed to do with that? Pretend it hadn't happened? File it away as a dream? No. That kiss lingered, branded into his thoughts, impossible to ignore. It left him with more questions than answers, and a heart that refused to settle. She was so complicated. Sometimes she treated him like a nuisance, other times like an ally. He never knew which version he was going to get. Still, even the smallest bit of attention from her, an offhand comment, a glance that lingered a heartbeat too long, was enough to make his chest tighten and his thoughts spin. And then there was the age thing. 600 years old. 600 years. That number should have made it impossible, laughable even. But elves didn't age like humans. She didn't look a day over 30, And if he was being honest, he'd always preferred older women anyway. That part didn't bother him in the least. What did bother him was the wall she kept between them. He decided then and there not to force it. He'd train, he'd fight, he'd stay close, and if something happened, it happened. If not, well, at least he'd have the chance to stand beside her. Right now, he would continue working on his cardio, and that meant running. He was halfway through his second circuit around the merchant district when an oxen cart tipped over right in front of him, snapping him out of his thoughts. A chorus of startled shouts rang out. Without hesitating, Brian rushed forward. "Need a hand?" he called out, already moving to help the group of men lift the heavy cart back onto its wheels. "Thanks, young man," one of them said with a smile as Brian jogged away, waving over his shoulder. His breath came heavy but steady. His legs ached, and still, he kept moving. He could always choose to keep running. Brian's newly crafted sweatsuit was a minor miracle in stitching, a tailor-made blend of practicality and vision. Woven from finely spun black wool, soft as cloudgrass and surprisingly breathable, it hugged his frame in all the right places. Despite the medieval setting, it looked almost exactly like the training suits he'd worn back on Earth, minus the logos and synthetic material. The village seamstress had somehow taken his rough sketches, vague descriptions, and flailing hand gestures and turned them into something that looked pulled straight from a sporting goods store. The jacket zipped up the front and was lined with a subtle grey threading along the cuffs and seams. The pants tapered just enough to avoid dragging while he ran, and their deep pockets were a luxury he hadn't expected. The whole outfit gave him the freedom to move and breathe, an absolute necessity in a world where surprise attacks were more common than birdsong. It was a sweatsuit, and frankly, the name had never been more accurate. By the time he was halfway through his first lap around Greyhearth's outer ring, the back of his shirt clung to him like a needy goblin. Still, he didn't mind. This was part of the grind. On his feet were the only visual reminder he had of Earth that he still clung to, his sneakers. Lightweight, scuffed from weeks and weeks of use, but still springy enough to give his stride a rhythmic bounce. He only wore them for his morning runs now, saving every bit of wear for as long as he could. Every time they slapped against the cobblestone or dirt path, he wondered what he'd wear once they finally gave out. Would he commission magical running shoes? Was that a thing here? For now, though, they held, just like he intended to, mile after mile, breath after breath. He turned a corner near the merchant square, sweat dampening the back of his neck. Stamina, he huffed. Of all the stats to be trash at. On Earth, he could go 10 rounds in a martial arts tournament and barely break a sweat. But here, this world didn't fight fair. Monsters didn't tap out. Goblins didn't wait politely for a breath break. And ogres? Ogres hit like trucks and just kept coming. That ogre fight, man. He shook his head as he ran past a bored guard leaning against a gate. It had the potential to be so much deadlier. That memory, Freya crumpled against the wall and him being slammed across the room, flashed again. He pushed harder. He still had to figure out his weapon. Magic he had no clue about. There was nothing like it back on Earth. But stamina? That was a problem he could fix now. 2 laps around the city wall every morning and 2 every evening. No excuses, no shortcuts. As he ran past the gate, the forest loomed to his right, green and wild and full of memories. The place he landed, the fight with the shadow wolves and Elims saving him. That moment where everything changed. He slowed briefly near a fountain, splashing cold water on his face. His reflection stared back at him, tired, a little rough around the edges, but determined. "Let's go, DLC mode," he muttered, smirking. That phrase, DLC mode, had started as a joke in his head. On Earth, it stood for extra downloadable content. Here, it was how he thought of his sudden burst of hidden power during that Ogre King fight. His legs had moved like lightning, like he was tapping into something deeper. He still didn't understand what it was. Freya had noticed. She hadn't said a word, but he caught the way her eyes narrowed, curious, suspicious, maybe even impressed. He resumed his run at a faster pace. Note to self. Figure out what that was before it explodes and kills me. Greyhearth rose all around him. Massive stone walls, crisscrossing bridges, towers with ivy curling around the base. It wasn't home yet, but it was starting to feel familiar. And that was enough. As he neared the tavern, the Spotted Fawn, he saw Harnock already outside with a mug of morning brew, waving lazily. "Up early, are ya?" the dwarf called. "Trying not to die next time," Brian said, flashing a grin. "Seems like a good long-term plan." "Bah, I agree," said the dwarf, taking a swig. He laughed, wiping sweat from his brow as he climbed the stairs. This world was unforgiving. But Brian had decided something. He was going to survive. Even if he had to kill himself doing that. And one day, just maybe, he'd find out who he was meant to become in this place. But first, a quick shower and something to eat. Elim's room smelled faintly of iron and old leather, scars of war clinging to the walls in the form of battered shields and half-burned quest maps. The group sat scattered on whatever passed for seating, Lystra on the windowsill, Freya sharpening arrows in the corner, Brian perched on a chest, and Harnock nursing a mug of something that smelled like bad decisions. With a grunt, Elim heaved a heavy burlap sack onto the low table with a metallic thud. "Finally," he said, "I'll pay for the ogre cleanup." Brian blinked. "That sack?" Elim grinned and yanked the cords loose. Gold coins spilled out in a golden wave, catching the sunlight. Even Freya paused her whetstone. Unofficial job or not, those villages were getting raided. People went missing, Elim said. The council had no choice but to cough up something. Took their sweet time. Investigation, they said. He rolled his eyes. What they meant was, let's delay this long enough to adjust the payout. Corruption, plain and simple. Trying to squeeze out the little guys like us. They forget it was us who handled it, Harnock grunted. Wouldn't have done a thing if we hadn't stepped in. And even this isn't what they promised, Elim continued, splitting the coin into smaller piles. We were supposed to get double. Wait, Brian asked, watching the piles grow. So where'd all this come from? Sold the ogre's gear, weapons, and what little hoard they had. Couple bits of enchanted bone. Some sucker paid high for a cracked obsidian bracelet. Took everything that wasn't nailed down. Also sold their bodies to the science corps. It was not very often they got ogre bodies in such good condition, especially the king. They were practically drooling over themselves. Elim paused, digging in his pouch. Also picked up this. He held up a dark iron ring, etched with deep runes that pulsed faintly. Ring of the Gravity Forge, he said, tossing it toward Brian. Brian caught it, his hand dropping slightly from the weight. What does it do? Elim smirked. Makes you heavier, all the time. Trains your muscles, your joints, your breathing. Makes walking, running, jumping harder. You wear that for a month and everything else feels like you're flying. Brian turned it in his fingers, eyes wide. Can I? Take it, Elim interrupted with a nod. You're working to get stronger, I see that. It'll help. Thanks, man, Brian said quietly. Brian leaned back in his chair, absently turning the gravity-forged ring between his fingers as thoughts swirled through his head. He'd spent the past few days trying to add new ways to train in his regiment. He wanted to train smarter, not just harder. He thought of some of the anime characters in his old world, Goku's weighted clothing, Lee's ankle and wrist weights, symbols of their relentless effort to get stronger. At the time, they seemed like fantasy dramatics, cool ideas for a character. But now, here in this world, a ring existed that actually increased gravity on the wearer. He never imagined he'd find something so perfectly aligned with his goals. Brian glanced at his companions, still busy talking around the table, then slipped the ring into his pocket. He'd test it out later, alone. No need for an audience while he figured out just how heavy the path ahead might really be. Coins clicked as Elim finished dividing the payout. Everyone gets their cut. This pile's for guild expenses, paperwork, repairs, to help with new gear if necessary, etc. "Here, put this in the iron beast," he said, handing the bag to Harnock. "Yes, sir," said the dwarf with reverence. Lystra smiled. "Dreaming big, Elim." "Maybe, but I think we are getting to the point where we should consider forming a guild," he added, "or at least giving our party a name." The others nodded. Just as they relaxed, a soft knock came at the door. Elim opened the door to find a boy no older than 12. His clothes were clean, but his face streaked with tears and dirt, while worry clung to him like a shadow. "Andy," Elim said, surprised. The boy's lower lip trembled. "Mr. Elim, it's Ellie. She's missing." Lystra stood instantly, eyes sharp. "She hasn't come home in 3 days," Andy said. "She always checks in. She said, if anything ever happened, I should come find you." Elim led him inside, sat him down, and motioned for Lystra to examine him. "She's his older sister," Elim explained to Brian. "A fighter-class adventurer. She's raised him since their parents died. We used to train together." "She wouldn't just vanish," Andy whispered. "Please, you're the only ones we trust." Freya knelt beside him. "Do you know where she was last?" Andy hesitated. She joined the underground fight club." Silence dropped like a stone. Lystra placed a hand on his shoulder. "Come, let's get you cleaned and fed. You'll stay with us until we find her." "I'll go too," Harnock said. He never did like seeing kids in pain. When the door closed behind them, Freya and Elim's expressions turned grim. "What is it?" Brian asked. Elim exhaled. "The Fight Club, a.k.a. The Crimson Pit, is not illegal, but it's not regulated either. No oversight. Rumors of kidnappings, rigged matches, fighters disappearing, etc." "Where do we start?" Freya asked, arms crossed. They mulled it over for a while, thinking. Then Brian leaned forward, a mischievous spark in his eye. "I have an idea. I join the club. Get inside." "No," Elim and Freya said in unison. "Think about it," Brian insisted. "No one knows me. I'll just be another desperate fighter looking for coin. While you two back me up, Freya can be my manager, Elim as a shady bettor. The perfect trio." Elim rubbed his beard. "Honestly, it tracks. The guild already thinks we're washed-up misfits." "I'm still not thrilled," Freya muttered, "but it's the best plan we've got. We'll need to tweak the details, but it could work." Brian grinned. "Good, then let's get your friend back." The sun was beginning its slow descent over Greyhearth, casting long golden shadows over the rooftops and giving the cobbled streets a molten glow. But inside an upper room of the Spotted Fawn, the mood was far from calm. The table was covered with costumes, coins, and charcoal-scrawled floor plans of shady alleyways and rumoured entrances to the underground fight circuit. They had spent the entire day preparing, quietly gathering information, outfitting themselves, and rehearsing their parts. Every minute they delayed was another minute Ellie might be suffering. Or worse. Elim adjusted the simple brown tunic over his barrel chest. His hammer had been traded for a weathered cane that held a special surprise, and his battered shield was left leaning in the corner. Without armour, he looked older, wearier, just another former soldier trying to scrounge for coin in the city's darker corners. "If anyone asks," he muttered, tightening the leather straps on his boots, "I'm just another broke veteran with debts, looking to win big before the clock runs out." Lystra nodded silently. Harnock stood near the window, casting the final spell of the night. His fingers drew silver sigils in the air as he whispered in Dwarvish. Magic shimmered like oil in the air around Freya. Brian turned in time to see her step out of the spell's glow. His mouth dropped open. Her usual platinum hair, sharp and gleaming like moonlight, was now a rich, burning red, tumbling around her face in loose waves. Her skin had darkened a touch, her ears subtly blunted. Harnock's chameleon's guise spell had done its job perfectly. No one would recognize her as the solitary elf of Greyhearth. She wore a dark, hooded cloak with no insignia, and deep shadows clung to her like loyal dogs. "You're staring," she said, raising an eyebrow. Brian blinked and looked away, rubbing the back of his neck. "Right. Sorry. It's just different." "Good," she replied coolly. "Different means alive." Brian's own outfit was less mystique and more menace, jet black from head to toe. A sleeveless tunic, dark arm wraps with red in them to resemble blood, and cotton black pants that were perfect for max movement. His mask was simple but striking, a matte black plate with a single crimson stripe running diagonally across the face, like a scar. No name, no emblem, just the Black Fighter. "Not bad," Freya muttered, inspecting him. "Intimidating enough, though." She reached into her cloak and pulled out iron shackles. Brian took a step back. "Hold on. Are those?" "Yes," she said, smiling far too innocently. "Chains, for your ankles and wrists. You're my slave. I'm your handler. It fits the underground's love of drama. I own you." "You're joking," he stammered. She stepped forward, clinking the chains together with the wicked glee of someone enjoying themselves far too much. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Brian raised a hand. "Wait, let me guess. You also brought a leash?" Her grin widened. "Don't tempt me." Elim stifled a laugh. Harnack didn't bother hiding his. Lister smiled. The once stoic Freya had started to open up, and as her friend it was amazing to witness. "You'll wear them until the fight starts," Freya added, serious again. "They'll think I'm using you to gamble. That gives us cover to move around freely without too many questions. The mask gives you mystique, and the chains give you a reason not to talk. I do the speaking, you do the fighting. Understood, servant?" Brian exhaled slowly, eyeing the chains as if they might sprout fangs and bite him. "Right, of course. Just another normal day in Fantasyland. No big deal." Freya arched an eyebrow. "Wrong answer," she said dryly. "The correct response is, yes, boss." Brian glanced up at her, the corners of his mouth twitching. "Yes, boss," he muttered, deadpan. Across the room, Lystra chuckled. Watching those two was like watching fire and oil. Tense, unpredictable, but undeniably entertaining. They were funny, and honestly, kind of adorable together. Not that she'd ever say it out loud. Elim checked the window, watching the last rays of daylight vanish. "Sun's gone. It's time." Freya's expression hardened beneath the hood. "Time to move out. If Ellie's still alive, we will find her. And if she is not," said Brian, a little worried. Then said Elim, "There will be hell to pay." The room fell silent. The three headed out. Brian and Freya took one entrance, while Elim two another. They descended into Greyhearth's underbelly, not as adventurers, but as infiltrators, gamblers, and shadows chasing whispers. All five hoping that they were a step closer to the answers they desperately needed. Brian's footsteps clinked softly against the worn stone, the chains on his wrists and ankles adding a rhythmic rattle to every move. He kept his posture low, submissive, just behind Freya's right side, as instructed. The narrow alley they had entered from the bustling Greyhearth market was eerily silent now, lined with broken crates and shadows that stretched long in the evening gloom. Freya, cloaked in her unmarked black hood and hidden under Harnack's chameleon's guise spell, walked with the cool grace of a noble predator, her once silver hair now a burning red that caught torchlight even in the dark. She didn't glance at Brian, but her presence alone gave the sense that she could strike or command with a single breath.
If this story made you smile or vibe, tap like, subscribe. Stay alive. More tales are loading. Don't be late. Hit the bell. Destiny waits.
Iron door. No markings, no signs. Just a symbol carved crudely into the stone beside it. A red claw with 3 drops of blood dripping from it. She knocked twice, waited, then once more. A lock slid open. The door creaked inward. They stepped inside and immediately descended, down a long stone stairwell, damp and narrow, winding like a snake into the earth. The only light came from enchanted braziers that flickered an unsettling crimson and coal-black flame, casting twisted shadows on the ancient walls. The further down they went, the heavier the air became. The scent of sweat, blood, and stale smoke clung like a second skin. After nearly 10 minutes, the corridor opened into a massive subterranean coliseum, its ceiling lost in the gloom above. It was a circular arena carved straight into the bedrock. In the center stood a huge reinforced iron cage, the floor of it stained dark with old blood, sand crunching under every step of its current contenders. Runes glowed faintly along the cage's edges. Enchantments meant to contain, or perhaps enhance, the brutality within. Around the cage, a pit level of hard stone benches held the common crowd, mercenaries, gamblers, slavers, and thrill-seekers screaming for blood. Above that rose 4 tiers of balconies, each level becoming more lavish the higher they went. Silk curtains, velvet cushions, and glowing magical orbs lit the rooms where nobles and wealthy degenerates made wagers, sipped fine wines, and watched carnage for pleasure. Each tier was adorned in crimson, gold, and deep obsidian, the signature colors of the Crimson Pit. 2 massive bouncers stepped in front of them. One was a horned half-orc, the other a woman with tattoos across her face and a nose ring the size of a coin. They said nothing, just patted Brian roughly, checking his chains, testing the strength of his bindings. "He's clean," the half-orc grunted, "and quiet." A voice, oily and polished, greeted them next. "Well, well, what do we have here?" They turned to see a man in a finely tailored dark red coat, embroidered with subtle flame patterns. His hair was slicked back, and a long scar curved under one eye like a mocking smile. "I'm Julius," he said, giving Freya a slow once-over. "Assistant to our glorious host and master of this fine establishment. And you are?" Freya didn't blink. "Call me Red. I've brought a fighter. He's mine." She said it with such control, such nonchalance, that Julius arched a brow in genuine interest. "Yours, is he?" Julius turned to Brian, who stared back at him through his black mask with the crimson stripe. "Got yourself a real mysterious one, huh? The boss will like that. But understand something, Red. This isn't some tavern brawl or guild trial." He gestured to the blood-stained cage. A scream rang out from inside as a fighter was slammed into the bars. "This is the Crimson Pit. Here, people die, servants die, masters die, and your name doesn't mean a goddamn thing unless it's scrawled in someone's blood." Freya smiled faintly beneath her hood. "Good. We like it that way." Brian could understand servants/fighters dying but masters. He didn't like the way the man said that. Julius eyed her again, suspicious, but something in her presence made him step back. "Come. The boss would like to meet you before your pet steps into the ring." Brian kept his gaze forward, silent, playing the part. But as he walked behind Freya through the blood-drenched corridors of the Crimson Pit, something began to burn low in his chest. Not fear. Focus. The fight had begun before a single punch was thrown. Julius led them through a narrow corridor lit by hanging red lanterns. Every few steps they passed caged cells, fighters inside, some stretching in silence, others curled up in corners, bruised and broken. The air reeked of blood, sweat, and damp stone. At the end of the corridor stood a pair of heavy blackwood doors inlaid with golden claw marks. The doors creaked open into a lavish lounge. Velvet curtains lined the walls, muffling the roar of the arena beyond. A low table stood in the center, ringed with plush couches and littered with gold coins, half-empty goblets, and torn betting slips. Sitting in the middle of it all was a broad-shouldered man with slick silver hair and eyes like wet granite. He wore no armor, just a blood-red vest over a black silk shirt, unbuttoned halfway to reveal a tattooed chest. On his fingers were thick rings, and his voice had the weight of authority carved from violence. "Well now," he said, gesturing lazily. "So this is the Red I've heard about. Freya offered a slight bow, her hood hiding her facial expression. "And you must be the man behind the pit." The man gave a chuckle, rich, amused, and completely unbothered. "Call me Varric. I run this little show." His eyes slid over to Brian, who remained still, wrists and ankles bound by the gleaming iron chains, head lowered just enough to show submission, just enough to hide the sharp look in his eyes. "He yours?" Varric asked. "Looks strong. Got that calm before the storm thing going? I like it." "He's mine," Freya replied, her voice smooth and distant. "To train, to use, to fight." One of the henchmen lounging behind Varric, a weaselly man with a hooked nose and rotted teeth, let out a sharp laugh. He stepped forward and reached for Freya's hood. "Let's see the face behind that pretty red hair." His fingers never made it. Crack! In a blur of movement, Brian surged forward, his chains rattling like thunder. He twisted his body, driving his knee into the man's ribs with enough force to lift him off the ground. As the henchman stumbled back, wheezing, Brian followed through with a spinning elbow that smashed into his jaw, dropping him to the floor in a crumpled heap. The room fell silent. Brian took a knee in front of his mistress, waiting for what came next. Fighting those other 3 henchmen in chains would be hard, but not impossible. The 3 other henchmen immediately drew their weapons and surged forward. Freya put her hand on Brian's shoulder at the same time that Varric raised a single hand, and they both yelled, "Stop!" At the same time, all parties instantly froze. The silver-haired boss leaned forward, a grin playing across his lips. Well, we've got a wild one. Chained up and still faster than most men with swords." His gaze lingered on Brian. "I like that." Freya stood still, her head slightly tilted. But if anyone had looked closer, they'd see her shoulders relax just a bit. Julius cleared his throat. "Apologies, boss. That one, he didn't know." "No," Varric said calmly, rising to his feet. "He didn't, but now he does. Let this be a lesson to the rest of you. Never touch Red." Varric walked slowly around Brian, studying him. "You fight tonight. No trials, no warm-up. You go into the cage and prove whether that fire is real or just smoke." Brian didn't flinch. "Your opponent is another newcomer, a brute from the northern tribes, likes to break spines." Varric chuckled. "Should be a good match." He stepped back and folded his arms. "If you survive, maybe you earn a place here. If not, well, Red will just have to find herself another toy." Brian lifted his head then. The mask couldn't hide the spark in his eyes. "Seems your boy is ready for the challenge," said Varric. "He is always ready," she replied proudly. Varric barked a laugh. "Good, because here we enjoy a good fight." He gestured toward the exit. "Go, the fight starts in an hour. Don't be late." As they left, Varric called Julius over. "Get them a room and keep an eye on them. Also see what you can find out about them. I don't need any surprises." "Yes, boss," was Julius's reply as he headed out the room. Elim adjusted the collar of his plain cloak. Not wearing his armor, he felt naked. The moment he passed through the reinforced door and down the spiraling stairs, the scent hit him. Sweat, smoke, old blood, and spiced wine. It was a cocktail of memory and tension, bringing him back to the days when he'd shadow his father through similar places, holding his hand tightly, wide-eyed while men gambled away coin and dignity in equal measure. The stairs opened into the first floor of the Crimson Pit, a massive, circular underground coliseum carved into ancient stone and reinforced with modern enchantments. Crimson banners lined the railings like veins, their silken folds shifting in the warm, torchlit breeze. The pit itself, cage and all, loomed in the center like a monster's maw, waiting to devour the desperate and the brave alike. Elim moved through the crowd with the confidence of a man twice as wide as most. He didn't shove. He didn't need to. People made space for him, glancing up and stepping aside. The bouncers, rough-looking brutes with jagged tattoos and thicker arms than sense, barely reached his shoulder. They gave him one glance, decided to let sleeping giants lie, and waved him through. The first-floor betting ring was a den of noise and flashing coin. Tables circled the outer rim of the arena, manned by runners in leather jerkins who shouted odds over the din. Parchment sheets were pinned to wooden boards, showing the matchups and names, many nicknames, few real identities. Fighters with monikers like the Iron Claw, Grinder, and Wraith-Blooded graced the boards, alongside odds scrawled in chalk that changed rapidly with each shout. Elim took a seat near one of the lower ringside booths, a strategic position that gave him both a good view of the pit and the floor's crowd. The bettors were as diverse as the odds, desperate miners with dirt under their nails tossing in their last silver, slick nobles hiding under dark cloaks with glittering jewelry peeking out, brothel keepers, spice merchants, mercenaries and thieves. Some shouted, others muttered. Many had guards, quiet, hard-eyed men leaning on staves, playing with daggers, or simply the threat of brutality. Just as he settled into his seat, a woman glided up beside him. Long dark hair, a silk shawl draped across her shoulders, and perfume that could probably pay a week's rent. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, smiling like they were old friends. "Go ahead," Elim said with a nod, shifting slightly to make room. She didn't waste time. "You new here? You've got the look, like someone who used to break legs for coin and decided to retire to a quieter life." "I used to follow my father around places like this," Elim said, not looking at her. "He liked to bet. I liked to watch. Dangerous habit. Betting and watching." She leaned in a little closer, sipping from a long-stemmed glass. "What brings you here tonight?" Elim's eyes stayed fixed on the fighters warming up behind the pit's grated walls. "Looking to make a little coin." The woman chuckled and took another sip. "Aren't we all?" He nodded silently, eyes sweeping the upper floors, the shadowed balconies where the real power sat. Cloaked figures in lavish booths, each guarded by elites. Up there, gold didn't clink, it moved kingdoms. Elim let the noise wash over him, pretending to be part of the scene, when in truth he was watching everything, especially the corridors where one of their own might be taken next. The door shut with a quiet click behind them. Brian scanned the room, dimly lit, sparsely furnished, with an old wooden bed, a cracked wash basin, and a single shelf with nothing but a potted plant that looked suspiciously plastic. Freya gave the place a once-over, then nodded at the ceiling. "Audio for sure," she murmured under her breath. "Might be visual too, though I can't see a lens." Brian raised an eyebrow. Freya moved to a small panel near the bed, twisted a dial, and soon soft, thudding music filled the room. Deep, percussive beats with no lyrics, just enough to blur conversation under layers of ambient noise. She stretched, arms over her head, then turned to Brian with a sly grin. "Time to sell the performance." Before he could ask what she meant, she grabbed the chains on his wrists and tugged him over to the wall. There, embedded in the stone, was a thick iron nail, probably for cloaks or weapons. She looped the chains over it in one smooth motion. Brian's feet dangled a few inches above the ground. He blinked. "Seriously?" Freya leaned in close, resting one hand lightly on his chest and the other at his side. She started wiggling her fingers against his ribs, slowly and deliberately. Brian clenched his jaw, trying not to laugh. "What was that little display back there?" she whispered, her lips near his ear. "Didn't I say I'd do the talking?" "I didn't talk," he said, barely holding back a grin. "I defended my mistress. Not one word." Her fingers kept moving, more insistent now. "Crafty little rule bender, aren't you? Very clever, hiding disobedience behind obedience." "I'm innocent," Brian gasped, trying not to squirm. "Totally innocent." She narrowed her eyes, clearly enjoying the control. "Beg me to stop." "No," he said defiantly. Her hands moved up his sides to his pits. "I said beg me." She tickled him for a minute straight. Okay, I'll be good," he managed to say breathlessly. No more clever rule-breaking. Freya smirked. That's more like it. She leaned in even closer, her voice soft. Thank you, she whispered. Then, with a barely audible puff of air, she blew into his ear, just to mess with him. Brian blinked as she unhooked the chains and let him down. He rubbed his wrists and shot her a look. You're dangerous. Freya turned away, pulling her hood back over her red hair. I prefer tactical. Brian shook his head and muttered under his breath. What a tease. Freya didn't answer, but he was pretty sure she heard him. And judging by the grin playing at the corner of her lips, she wasn't sorry at all. Lystra had made some warm broth for Andy, but he barely touched it. The boy's hands trembled as he held the wooden bowl, staring into it like it might give him answers. He'd cried on and off since arriving, silent tears at first, then sobs that racked his thin frame. Lystra had wrapped him in a spare blanket and coaxed him into a chair by the hearth, her voice as soft as the firelight flickering across the walls. He's just a boy, she murmured when Harnock gave her a look across the room. Too young for all this. Harnock nodded somberly. Aye, but this world doesn't ask your age before it gets cruel. He already lost his parents and now his sister. It must be excruciating, Lystra thought later, when the shadows grew longer and the city outside quieted to a distant hum. Harnock pulled up a stool beside the boy. He cleared his throat and began one of his tales, an embellished, entirely ridiculous account of how he once rode a giant tortoise through a collapsing cavern, all while trying to rescue a queen's lost ferret. Andy didn't laugh. Not at first. But his trembling slowed, and the tears stopped, and somewhere between Harnock mimicking the tortoise's growl and describing the ferret with the attitude of a noble, the boy leaned against Lystra and finally smiled. Just a little. When he drifted off, it was mid-sentence, curled into Lystra's side, clinging to her like the world might fall apart if he let go. She glanced down at the boy's sleeping face and brushed a hand through his dusty hair. Poor thing. I hope to the stars we're not too late. Harnock poured a cup of tea and settled beside her. We're in the waiting phase now. Elim will leave word if anything changes. Where? Under the park bench in the temple district, behind the cracked marble pillar, he said. Old trick. No one pays attention to pigeons and parchment under benches. Lystra nodded, her gaze distant. Every day, we wait. And every day we don't find Ellie, Harnock added. He gets closer to being alone. They both looked at Andy, now softly snoring, still curled up with his small arms around Lystra's waist. Harnock sighed and sipped his tea. We'll check the bench first thing in the morning. And every morning after, Lystra replied, voice steady. Until we bring her home. Ellie had seen death before. But the kind of death she witnessed in the Crimson Pit. That was different. It wasn't sudden or natural or even merciful. It was performance. Carnage fed to a cheering crowd, cruelty made into entertainment, with flesh and blood as the price of admission, and someone she loved had died in this place. Her friend, Ryan, had stumbled across something strange. He told her he couldn't say what yet, not until he was sure. He just needed one more night in the pit, one more shift. Then, nothing. He never came back. She was here to find out why Ryan was found gutted in an alley 2 blocks from the pit, his body mutilated, his coin purse untouched. And what it was he'd discovered just before his death. She buried him with dirt under her fingernails and a vow burning in her chest. Now here she was, dressed in simple linen clothes, posing as a low-level maintenance worker, a cleaner, a water runner, and occasionally a runner between betting booths. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave her access. The Crimson Pit, for all its bloody flair, operated under the pretense of legality. It wasn't technically outlawed, just unsanctioned. A grey area, like a tumour no one wanted to acknowledge because too many people profited from it. From above, it looked like a worn-down Colosseum, circular, sunken, ringed by red banners and shadowy upper balconies. In the center sat a domed cage of wrought iron, 30 feet across, blood-stained sand coating the floor like rusted velvet. The lowest level was for common folk, shady dealers, street gangs, drunks with coin to burn. Higher up were the tiered balconies, private rooms with tinted windows for the city's more refined gamblers, nobles, military commanders, maybe even a few members of the guild council. Ellie hated every inch of it, and yet she moved among them, mop in hand, eyes lowered, voice soft. By the second day she learned the patrol routes of guards. She tracked which rooms were locked at night. She saw crates being unloaded and quietly labelled in the dead of night. She asked questions, gently at first. Did you know who Ryan who used to here? Who did he fight? When did you say you last saw him? Just gentle probes, never twice to the same person, always with a hint of naivety, but too many gentle probes become a hammer. Julius was the type of man who wore silence like armor, always dressed in shadow-draped clothing with golden buttons shaped like knives. His face held a permanent half-smirk, the kind that made people unsure if he knew something funny or something terrifying. He ran the operations for Varric, the man everyone believed to be the boss of the pit. But Ellie had watched enough to know Varric handled appearances, Julius handled truths. She first noticed something was wrong when she started to feel like someone was watching her. Subtle at first, a glimpse of movement in reflective glass. The same person showing up near every hallway she passed. The strange silence that followed her steps, even when no one was there. She tried to shake it off. Paranoia, maybe. Too many nights without rest. But her instincts screamed otherwise. One night, just past midnight, she crept down a tunnel beneath the Colosseum's west wing. The cleaning shift had been reassigned to her. Strange, convenient, suspicious. Still, she had work to do. This wing was where fighters were kept. Not just the ones who fought for coin, but the others. The unspoken matches. The ones no one advertised. Rumors said people disappeared into those rooms and never came out. She knelt near one of the doors, sliding a bent nail into the lock she'd loosened over days. The bolt clicked back, slow and quiet. Inside was a crude archive. Not paper, but tokens. Names etched into bone, filed by chain-linked tags. Some were marked with blood sigils, some glowed faintly. She found one with Ryan's name. Her throat tightened. Next to it, removed, stage 2, bidding, 2,000 gold, recipient. Stage 2? What the hell is stage 2? She turned toward the far desk, hoping for a record, a ledger, anything. But the door slammed shut behind her. A tall, wiry man stepped into the room, flanked by 2 guards. "Miss Ellie," Julius said casually, brushing dust from his sleeve. "Your resume didn't mention you were so curious." Ellie's hand went instinctively to her belt. No dagger, no coin, just her hands. She stepped back toward the desk. "I was just cleaning, got lost." "Of course," Julius said, voice oily. "Many people lose themselves in this place." He stepped forward, circling her like a wolf. "Ryan lost himself too. You were close, weren't you? A friend? A lover?" Ellie didn't respond. Her jaw clenched. "Pity. I had such high hopes for him." He reached down and picked up the bone tag. "Stage 2. He never made it past processing. Heart couldn't take it." "You killed him." Julius's smirk widened. "Oh no. He expired. Like meat left too long in the sun. He wasn't strong enough.